Is Mr. Jim Gitney, who is the CEO of Group 50 Consulting, which he formed in 2004 after 26 years of international business experience with GE, Black & Decker, Sunbeam, and Rainbird. Jim has run operations in the United States, Mexico, Malaysia, and China. His international trade experience includes working with companies in over 30 countries, and he has done consulting work in 11 different countries in Europe, Latin America, and Asia, and specifically in China and India. Jim has served on boards of directors and has had multiple C-level positions in his career, ranging from startups to the Fortune 100. Jim is considered a supply chain and global operations subject matter expert and has led 11 financial and operational restructurings during his career. He has a mechanical engineering degree and an MBA with a focus on finance and strategic planning. And I'm excited to welcome Mr. Jim Gitney to discuss blockchain technology and its impact on international trade.
Dr. Jackson, thank you for inviting me to the faculty of this great campus, which is the first time I've been here. Thank you for inviting me as well, and it is a wonderful honor to talk to this group representing many different countries about blockchain and its impact on international trade. Do we have the presentation up, please? Thank you. So in 2017, the World Economic Forum made the following statement, that international trade is under pressure. Fears fueled by immigration, by tariff wars, by counterfeiting, by regulation, and by nationalism has put a tremendous amount of pressure against the activity of international trade. And whether we're a manufacturer or we're in academia or we're in logistics or we're in warehousing, we all need to figure out ways to make this system more efficient, because at the end of the day, every time I have to do a new inspection or I have to take another step to bring products from some country to another country, whether it's importing products from the Philippines to the United States or from the United States to the Philippines or any other country, it costs more money and it takes more time and it makes international trade more difficult. The World Economic Forum back 2 years ago believed that blockchain could help. And what I want to do today is share with you a little bit about how my view of how blockchain and the Internet of Things is going to help make this process smoother. I hope. Oh, there we go. So, but before we get there, we need to talk a little bit about the advancement of technology. I heard technology mentioned multiple times this morning around, leveraging technology. I heard conversation about smart cities. I heard conversations about banking. I heard technology is the basis of many of the things we do. So we got to go all the way back to 1991 and the introduction of the internet, when Berners-Lee announced that he was launching the worldwide internet. And so that was a mere 30 years ago. And look at what has happened. And so the internet is now the fabric of the blockchain environment, because without the internet, blockchain wouldn't be able to exist. And in 2008, Satoshi Nakamoto, who's recently claimed to be a gentleman by the name of Craig Wright, and who was basically awarded the copyrights to Bitcoin and the Bitcoin white paper, figured out how to solve the double spending problem in digital currency. And what does that mean? That just basically means that I can't resell what I own twice to somebody else. right? And that was a major problem in the digital currency, in the digital currency world, and that is one technology that can resolve that. Then comes along a 19-year-old whiz kid by the name of Vitalik Buterin, who realizes that utilizing blockchain that was built for Bitcoin was not business friendly. And so he rewrote, or actually expanded upon, the blockchain to make it business friendly and introduced something called a smart contract. A smart contract is really nothing more than a digital form of a legal contract, except that it has the ability to digitally test whether something has been done or not. And smart contracts are going to be one of the major pieces behind the implementation of blockchain in international trade. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as we move along. Gartner estimates that between now and 2030, that on an annual basis, blockchain will save over $3 trillion in cost to world GDP. Now, world GDP this year is estimated to be right around $80 trillion. Based on the last estimate, it's actually going to be down this year versus last year. So if you sit and think about $80 trillion and you think about $3 trillion in cost reductions, that's about 4%. That's pretty significant. I actually believe that Gartner is underestimating the impact of blockchain and IoT technology to world GDP, and I'm going to explain to you why I feel differently during this presentation. Before we go any further, you might want to say, why do I need blockchain? Why do I want it? Do I need it? I mean, is it anything more, does it have any more substance than the fact that it is the underlying technology to Bitcoin, and does it really, is it really in the imagination of someone? The reason we need blockchain, and I'll ask this question, I'm going to make a comment to you. If I told you that everything I'm telling you today, I'm going to tell you everything I know about blockchain, and everything else I'm going to make up, and I'm going to leave it up to you to decide which is which, how would you feel about that? You wouldn't feel good about it, would you? You'd want to know, you'd want to immediately know which pieces I was telling you that I had properly vetted and which pieces I was making up. Now, let's go back and think about the number of you who are in international trade and how much work you have to do to validate the integrity of a product that you've gotten, that you've received, the fact that the manifest is correct, the fact that the quality of that product on that container is what you purchased. It's the same problem, isn't it? You have to go to multiple disparate databases that are owned by many different people. The shipping company, the manufacturer, the trucking company, the import-export company that you've dealt with, the bank who's funding that trade. You have to go and you have to find pieces of information from each one of them in disparate databases, and you still don't know which one's true. You have the same exact dilemma with believing what I'm saying, how true it is, as you do with any time you do international trade. And that's one of the reasons why it is so complex. That's one of the reasons why it has so many checks and balances. And there have been some estimates by McKinsey and others that almost 30% of the effort done in the import-export business is for nothing more than validation and verification. Now, if import-export is $7 or $10 trillion and 30% of it's in doing nothing more than validation, there's $3 trillion right there in reduced costs. So hold that thought in the back of your head for a second. So anyone or any process that requires you to go to many different databases that are controlled and owned by individuals who you may not know or trust, blockchain is an application for, okay? We're going to spend one more slide on blockchain because I think it's important to understand what it is And then we're going to move on and focus strictly on international trade. So blockchain technology is a tamper-proof, decentralized record of transactions that allow participants to collaborate and build trust with one another. It's a distributed ledger, and if we were all doing business together on the same blockchain, we would all have to agree to make a change to a piece of data in there. And if I don't agree, and if several others don't agree, we can't make that change. We can't move the transaction to the next step. Is that helpful? All right. So it's the underlying technology for Bitcoin and Ethereum. It's an aggregating technology. So remember the previous slide where I had databases all over the place? So when you create a blockchain, as the chain is being built, pieces of data are pulled from each one of those data sets. It could be data coming from a truck. It could be data coming from an IoT device. It could be data coming from someone's MRP system or their EDI system or the manifest from the shipper. But once it gets there, it can't be changed. It's immutable. It provides, blockchain allows you to create the full chain of custody and provenance of a product, right? How many of you worry about, especially for the ladies out there in the audience, that the Gucci bag or the Prada bag that you bought is real or counterfeit? Do you ever worry about that? How do you check? Blockchain would allow you to be able to understand from the raw material that was used, how it was manufactured, and you'd be able to go back and see that history of that product. Blocks are stored on a public or permissioned digital system, and all of us own a copy of that same ledger. It relies on established cryptographic technology. Now you go, whoa, hang on for a second. Established cryptographic technology called hashtags. Well, how many letters do I get every week about my credit card information being compromised in someone else's database? Target, right? American Express, MasterCard, many others, right? Who have had their data sets hacked. So what are you talking about, this standard cryptographic technology stuff? The difference is that in order for someone to hack what's in our blockchain, if we all owned a copy of it, they would have to hack every one of our copies instead of just one. So the amount of work required to hack 75 or 100 copies of the same database makes it uneconomical to go after. So there is an economic cost associated with hacking that provides another level of security on top of the cryptography. Smart contracts are the glue behind what's happening. So imagine a truck delivering milk, picking up a truckload of milk from a farmer. Milk during its life has to stay between 33 and 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Otherwise, it begins to spoil if you want to optimize its life. Imagine that this truck is moving along a 2-hour journey and it pulls into the ice cream factory, and immediately the sensors on the truck tell the ice cream factory that that milk stayed inside of its temperature range. I now immediately, the smart contract can say, yes, we've met the requirements and all the data we were looking for. Okay, it's okay to receive that load, and it's okay to pay that vendor, that trucker, for the milk that was delivered. So smart contracts, basically, we set up the requirements for what needs to happen when the product moves from one state, ownership by the trucking company, to another state now being owned by the ice cream manufacturer. And so that's where coupling it with the Internet of Things allows you to get down to that level of detail. And that's what we call provenance, the provenance of the product. The chain of custody is who owned it and when. The provenance is what did they do to it while it was there? Is that helpful? All right, so to summarize what blockchain is, and I realize I just did this in 6.5 minutes, and I've been studying blockchain for almost 4 years now. So, give me all day to talk about blockchain, I can make the presentation pretty quick. Give me 6 minutes to talk about blockchain, and it takes me all day to create the presentation, right? So if transactions in the blockchain, transactions are irreversible, anonymous, globally accessible, and built to be secure. And it sits on top of the existing infrastructure, pulling pieces of data from millions, perhaps thousands, perhaps millions of locations, and creating a complete immutable chain or history of a product during its life cycle. That's what we need to keep in mind as we talk about its impacts on international trade. So, millions of companies and governments will benefit from the application of blockchain and with significant international impact. We heard about sustainable fisheries this morning. Farm to table, if you sit and think about all of the things that happen in the United States alone, as many people die from foodborne illnesses as die from guns. Yet we see a tremendous outrage about guns and hear very little about that number of people dying from foodborne illnesses. Blockchain has the ability to address that, and I'll talk about a couple of those projects later on. International aircraft, the aircraft industry. If you sit and think about how important it is to understand the product life cycle and the provenance of a landing gear or a jet engine or a maintenance record, then you can begin to understand how important blockchain is to the aircraft industry, which impacts the globe. Healthcare, data records. I envision a day where each one of us will have our own healthcare blockchain, and all of our complete history of our healthcare will be on that blockchain. And we go to a doctor, we give them a 24-hour pass to have access to our entire healthcare history, x-rays and all that. No one else can get to it unless I give you permission to get to it. That's the kind of things that are going to happen in the near term. And as a matter of fact, are already happening, and I'll share some of that with you. And governments, if you sit, how many of you are involved with government regulation and compliance? Raise your hand. How difficult is it to find out whether someone has complied with a government regulation or not? It's extremely difficult, isn't it? Imagine if I was a company and you were the air quality board, and you could just dial in and see every measurement of every air quality measurement I've taken every hour to validate that I am complied. How much easier would that? Now imagine that you don't even have to do that, that there's a smart contract that's sitting there that you get an alert on your desk that says, hey, this guy's air quality just went over the limits, you need to give him a call. How much easier would that be? That's an example of the application of a smart contract against in compliance or government compliance. Retail, I've got a whole slide on retail, so I'm going to hold on to that for a second. Manufacturing is incredibly important, and we'll talk about that some more as well. Automotive industry, automotive safety standards, automotive compliance. VW would not have been, and Audi would not have been able to get away with what happened in the United States around their software applications had their product, the provenance of their product been governed by a blockchain. I truly believe that. Banking industry, we're going to talk a lot about that a little bit further. And then, of course, all of these industries that I've just identified are all internationally based and all required on the interaction at a global level in order to be successful. So let's talk about the countries that were here today. So this is where you're going to have to believe me on this, because I did two things. One is we did this research for this presentation. And number two is I required that I had at least two sources verifying this, because in our consulting work, I tell our guys, our consultants, do not reference something from the internet if you only can find one reference to that. Because anybody can write anything. Anyone can have a Facebook account, fake or real. The same thing at LinkedIn. So we've now gotten to the point where we now have to validate even our sources for research for a presentation like this to make sure that it is indeed true. So I want to talk about some of the more notable projects in South Korea. So South Korea is one of the few countries that has listed blockchain as one of those technologies that they'll give a tax credit to, which I think is very cool. And hopefully many other countries will follow. Shinhan Bank introduced a blockchain platform for the document verification. So when you go to Shinhan Bank, you now are, I'm assuming here, that they are going to be using a blockchain for your financial identity, is one of the applications. And it's immutable, it can't be changed. It will remember your financial transactions. It will remember how much money you had in the bank last month, how much money you've deposited into it this month. And so for verification purposes, and why are we doing this? Because we want to protect against money laundering. We want to comply with the know your customer regulations that are now coming out globally. So that's one of the reasons why this kind of application has been put in place. The DAPA is building a blockchain platform for military application, and that's incredibly important because chain of custody and provenance and the fact that it's been manufactured to the standards required by the government is incredibly important. Ministry of Science revealed that they would work with government agencies to do blockchain projects in the public sector, and they're actually funded $9 million last year for blockchain projects inside these areas. So South Korea is moving forward on these types of projects. Same thing in China. China Huawei is using the blockchain technology to build an innovative tourist city in Malaysia that will be a digital city. And they're actually creating their own token or coin. And so when you go to visit this city, you'll take yuan or dollars or renminbi, and you'll convert it to this coin. And everything you buy and everything you do inside the city will be with their own digital currency. New World Development Construction Company is a blockchain property trading platform. And what they're basically doing is, if you sit and think about the title of property or assets, being able to prove that it was yours and being able to prove that you have the right to sell it is a big deal in international trade. It's why blockchain and the fact that it has solved the double spending problem is critically important. The joint blockchain project of Tencent Holdings and the Shenzhen Tax Service, they want to have you create your tax profile blockchain, which will bring financial information into your blockchain and record what payments you've made in the taxation, what your tax bill was, and then it'll all be resolved. So we'll be pulling information from many different areas, and I'll have my own unique tax profile. Lufax is implementing a blockchain system to verify the identities of borrowers and lenders to keep track of transactions. Again, know your neighbor laws, which are incredibly important internationally, and requirements that there are not fraudulent transactions going on between parties who represent themselves differently. And then lastly, the insurance company is building a blockchain Zhong'an, blockchain chicken farms in poor rural areas in China. Now, what are we going to use blockchain for chicken farms? What is that going to do? So one of the very first applications of blockchain early last year, was there was a bad pork in a supermarket in China that sickened a bunch of people, and they were able, with the blockchain, to trace it all the way back to the actual farm where the pork came from. And same thing with chicken and salmonella and other types of foodborne diseases or foodborne illnesses. What happened? So let's talk about the Philippines. Now, I heard someone say that in the Philippines there's over 7,000 islands. 7,600. The Philippines, 7,600, okay. So there are blockchain projects. There's 2 different blockchain projects in the Philippines that are designed to create a currency that allows farmers and villagers and others who are not banked today, who can only do barter or actual hard currency exchange, to be able to be banked via the blockchain and to accelerate the ability to be able to make transactions amongst villagers and farmers from those over 7,000 islands. And there's 2 specific projects around that. Blockchain has always been proposed to be a micro payment or micro banking system that will allow, which almost 80% of the world's population is unbanked. Now, that number I may have made up, because as soon as I said it, I'm not exactly sure that that's correct. But there's a huge number of people globally who are unbanked. And blockchain has been viewed as one of those systems that would allow the unbanked to be able to have the appropriate transactions and financial representation. Sustainable organic farming. How many people buy organic foods? How do you know? Seriously, how do you know? You have to rely on the label at the grocery store. Well, how do you know that's correct? You trust your grocer, right? You trust the FDA? So I really do appreciate, I think that's fabulous, because, no, thank you for saying that, because while I trust the FDA as well, I don't trust the companies in their ability to be able to honor FDA guidelines and rules and regulations all the time. So blockchain has the ability to be able to, for me to go up with my cell phone to a head of organic lettuce and look at the QR code or the barcode and actually see the entire provenance of that head of lettuce all the way back to the farm, to know that it truly is organic. Because today, when I go to buy something that's organic, I don't know that it is. I truly don't know that it really is organic. So I figured it isn't that worth that extra premium, being that I don't know, and I bypass the organic lines. Okay, first electronic medical records. So we talked about healthcare earlier. There's a medical record project in the Philippines. Financial, we talked about banking. Now this last bullet is one that I find very interesting. So the PRRC, the Pasig River, did I say that correctly? Is working with a group of local and South African environmentalists and entrepreneurs to apply blockchain technology to manage the pollution levels and cleaning up a 27-mile stretch of the river outside of Manila, using IoT sensors, IoT technology, so that they can immediately see what's happening inside the river and how that environment and pollution inside of it is changing. Now, there's an application I wouldn't have thought of. And it's important to keep that in mind as we move on in this presentation. Okay, and then there are some other notable projects. The IBM Food Trust blockchain project. The UK is using it for tracking welfare payments and student loans. Georgia has implemented blockchain for land titling. Because dispute of land ownership has caused how many wars over the last centuries? Hundreds, thousands, skirmishes. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. I think one that most importantly affects this organization is Trade Lens, which is the joint Maersk and IBM blockchain for tracking containers. And over half of the global container ship companies are now a part of this project in just 18 months. So what they're going to be doing is creating a blockchain that allows you to take the information of a product that goes into a container and to monitor, create an immutable record of what happened to that product in that container during its shipment from its port of deembarkation to its port of embarkation. And that can include all the way to the truckers who are moving the containers off of the container ships. Now, what does that do? As we continue to build the tentacles of this blockchain into the manufacturers, I now have the ability to validate what the product actually is and what's in that container. And if it's immutable and I have a high level of trust in the system, then we're going to see a lot fewer containers being pulled aside for inspection. We're going to have a much higher confidence level that that container didn't get wet during shipment. I mean, how many times have you heard of containers coming in where all of the cargo in it was wet and therefore destroyed? Well, we can put IoT sensors inside those containers, and as soon as moisture gets in there, we can alert someone from the ship to go and fix it. That's another example of using blockchain and IoT technology in international trade. A team from Stanford has identified over 240 international projects in blockchain. Now, I won't spend a lot of time on this because we've kind of gone over it, but going back to that organic head of lettuce, here's what the model would look like if you had blockchain and IoT interface farm to table. So I literally could tell you on that head of lettuce that I said was organic, what seeds were used, what fertilizer was used, how it was watered, did it indeed during its 21-day life cycle, because that's the life cycle of a head of lettuce, 21 days. From the time it's cut till the time that you can't sell it, it starts to go bad, the last 21 days. And so I can tell you the complete provenance. I can even tell you what the quality of the wash sanitization water was inside the factory. I can tell you whether it followed the appropriate processes. I can tell you whether it got stuck on a dock in a shipping area. So these are the kinds of things that we can learn about the provenance and the chain of custody of that product for over that 21-day period. And so if this were in place, and Walmart is now requiring all of its vendors of leafy green vegetables to be on the food bank blockchain by the end of this year, the next time there is a Ebola outbreak, E. coli, sorry. As soon as I said Ebola, E. coli outbreak from Arizona, they'll be able to go all the way back and find not only the farm where it came from, but the section of the farm that it came from. And so instead of taking all romaine lettuce off of the shelves and not selling it anymore during the rest of the lettuce season, now we know exactly where lettuce from that affected area came from, and we can be much more prescriptive about how we're going to address that foodborne illness. Same thing with healthcare. We talked about healthcare. Like I said, I envision a day where I can go into the hospital, check myself into the hospital, wear a single device, have every one of my vital signs and my movements throughout the hospital monitored, and I get a complete blockchain history of my stay all the way through the post 30-day discharge. And it'll all be recorded. It'll all be immutable. It'll be all my own data. And I have the ability to only allow the people that I give permission to see it. Now, here's a couple pieces of information. So the World Economic Forum estimates that the digitization of the oil and gas industry could unlock $1.6 trillion in global value. Think about that, $1.6 trillion. What did I say GDP was, 80 trillion? So we're talking 1.5%, 2% of global GDP in just oil and gas industry. And $140 billion in productivity. We're starting to talk about some serious numbers here in terms of cost savings and a reduction in the cost of products that we consume on a daily basis. But the last three bullets are the ones, the second to the last two, 9% of oil transactions are disputed. Think about that, 9% of the transactions are disputed. Why? How do I know whether my oil went down that pipeline or this pipeline? Or ended up on this guy's truck? So when you're thinking about the amount of overhead and costs associated with disputing oil transactions, that's a pretty significant number. And the other one is that 15% of assets in the industry are counterfeit. Think about the implications of that. 15% of the piping that's used to transmit our oil across rivers, mountains, potentially is defective because it's counterfeit. And what kind of disasters, those environmental disasters, those kinds of things can cause. Blockchain has the ability to impact that number significantly by allowing me to be assured that the pipe that's coming in on that truck truly is the pipe that I ordered. It met all of the safety standards. It met all of the quality standards. Today, I can't do that. Today, I have to accept the word of the trucker that sent me the product. So blockchain and IoT in retail, we're going to go back to the counterfeiting. Counterfeiting costs and piracy will take $4.2 trillion out of the global economy by 2022. $4.2 trillion in counterfeiting and piracy. So think about that for a second. Is there anybody in here who's an artist? How many people here have intellectual property of some sort, a copyright or a patent? Several of you. You have the ability to protect your intellectual property and who's using it using blockchain technology. All right, but look at that third bullet, or the second one. Target, Saks, Walmart, Pennies sold fake Egyptian cotton linens for 3 years because they could not verify. They accepted someone else's word on the validity of the Egyptian cotton that was being used for those sheets. And when someone finally got out to get it taken care of, to go look at it, they found out that it was counterfeit, and it's cost them millions of dollars in repayments to consumers because of the fact that they were not on top of their game in terms of validating the source of those goods. Now, the great news was no one died from it. They may not have slept as well, and they may have been incredibly angry when they found out, but at the end of the day, this is an example of counterfeiting at its best. Going back to the international shipping, Maersk and IBM are estimating that it's going to reduce the cost of shipping internationally by 20%. That's a significant number. Let's talk about global aviation. So imagine, does anybody have an idea what percentage of the maintenance records on an airplane? How many people flew here on an airplane? Okay. What percentage of the airplanes that you flew on, what percentage of the maintenance records on the airplane that you flew on were handwritten? Any guess? 10%? 50%? 90%? Did I hear someone say 90? It is. 90% of all of the maintenance records for aircraft around the world are handwritten and stuffed into envelopes someplace or into filing cabinets, which means I get on this airplane, I really don't know what its maintenance history is. So how many of you look at the on-time status when you're booking a flight to know that this was on time, 70% of the time versus 20% of the time? Which one do you take? The one that has the better on-time record, right? Imagine if you could do the same thing for maintenance records. 2 flights, same cost, relatively same time, 2 different airlines, and one's got a maintenance score of 9.8 and one's got a maintenance score of 9.2. Which one do you take? 9.8, right? I mean, it's still airworthy, but you don't know what that other percentage was around maintenance. But what's important is the life cycle of flight safety parts. An engine gets taken off an airplane or a landing gear gets taken off an airplane. It goes to get refurbished. I rebuild it. If I have the complete life cycle history of that product, it's worth twice as much as one where I don't have that complete history. So it's incredible value to the industry. I realize I'm running out of time, but I can't get this. Oh, there we go. So this is actually my last slide. So this is pretty cool, huh? I mean, we're gonna be done in time. What does this mean? A system that has the potential to make the world's GDP $5 trillion more efficient. And it's $5+ trillion. I actually think the number is much higher than that. Because businesses spend 20 to 30% of their time doing verification and validation. And if you think about global GDP and you think about the amount of overhead businesses spend on verification and validation, those are significant cost savings, along with all of the other things that we talked about. Blockchain is where the internet was in 1996, in my opinion. So we've got a lot of ground to cover. Blockchain is being woven into the business fabric. Now, you'll notice that I did not say once today that there is a global international trading blockchain. I gave you snippets of pictures of big projects that are going on, financial. I hope. Financial, legal, trade, personal records, projects, manufacturing, and Internet of Things. So there's major projects happening all over the world in all of these different areas. It's probably 5 to 7 years before we see that fabric actually become a quilt. Today, it's pieces of fabric that are being built that will ultimately end up being woven into a new global trading platform where you will be able to know and have trust in everything that you purchase and everything that you receive when you get it. And I think that it's going to impact costs by more than 6% in the next 5 to 7 years. Thank you very much. Do we have time for questions? Yes, sir.
Something like an LTL, whether it's within the United States or international, how would you monitor that it hasn't been tampered with?
So there are several different strategies around that, but let's say I do a less than truckload shipment, put it on a pallet, I cover it, I put sensor on it, all right? That sensor could be a GPS sensor, it could be an environment sensor in terms of temperature and humidity. Correct, right? And so because it also has GPS, I now can track its journey. And I now, say for example, I had temperature excursion requirements. I now know whether the temperatures of that product went beyond certain levels. So now it gets to, you send it to me, I receive it, I upload the information, the smart contract says, yep, it met all the requirements, it wasn't tampered, the seal is still valid, the temperature requirements were met. Here's a copy of the manifest. Here's the information about those products that are in that pallet. And the smart contract says, yeah, Jim, it's okay for you to accept it. That's how we would go about doing it. To who?
How does the blockchain translate to Bitcoin?
Bitcoin? So Bitcoin is a digital currency, and it may or may not translate. Bitcoin, you notice I didn't talk about digital currencies today, right? I only talked about the application of the underlying technology, which is blockchain, to trade and to the supply chain. Digital currency is a whole nother crazy story. Any more questions? Yes. Absolutely, but not until we're far enough along in the manufacturing world to be able to provide you as a recycler with the chain of custody and the provenance of that product that you're bringing in to recycle. All right, so we've got a ways to go before reverse logistics, which is, I'm going to use the word reverse logistics for recycling, if you're okay with that. So I think we've got a ways. I think our first priority is to start making the stuff and documenting it properly. And then now you have a clear chain of custody. And by the way, if you don't have it, you pay less for it, right? So its value, as we talked about in the aircraft industry, will change based on its provenance in the chain of custody. All right? Any more questions? I was that good, huh? Okay, thank you very much, everybody.